Hello everyone. In today's video I would like to talk about what will happen in the aftermath of the Voice referendum. According to polls, the No campaign looks set to win by a large margin. But will that really be a victory for us? Will that be the end of the matter? What will happen after the 14th of October if the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament is rejected? I don't think a no win will be a victory in any sense. For starters, we know that governments don't respect election and referendum results. Take Brexit as an example. For the last 7 years, the British establishment has sought to scupper Brexit. And if Labour wins next year's general election, Britain looks set to rejoin the EU. You could also look at the 2016 US presidential election. For 4 years, the establishment tried to undermine Trump's administration. They engineered his defeat in 2020. And they are now running a campaign to ensure that he won't be re-elected in 2024. Similarly, I think that if the voice is rejected, the establishment will find a roundabout way to implement it, perhaps through legislation. They will find some way of bringing in the changes they want. But there's another reason a no victory will be a loss. If you live in Australia, you've no doubt seen the yes propaganda lately. Disinformania has taken over the internet. Can no-voice opportunists maintain control of an unleashed far-right flank? From The Guardian. The Indigenous Voice to Parliament proposal is not a secret UN plot to steal Australian land. It's not a proposal for a third chamber of Parliament. It's also not a conspiracy to stop dairy farming, impose backdoor communism, force people to listen to rap music, or start a new religion, though I have been told all these things on social media this past fortnight. Conspiracist ideology appeared to be the dominant theme across last weekend's nationwide-ish no mobilisations. Organised in part by a Putin apologist and anti-vaxxer, the rallies fluttered with red ensign sovereign citizen flags amid the dozens of people who turned out. Were Australians more endeared to the cause by the threats to lynch journalists seen on the back of one protester's t-shirt at the Sydney event, or the parade of black-clad neo-Nazis who turned up to the rally in Melbourne? Here the author is portraying the no camp as being dominated by conspiracy theorists and far-right extremists. She associates protesters with labels like sovereign citizen, Putin apologist and anti-vaxxer. She's employing several logical fallacies: poisoning the well, ad hominem and guilt by association. It's noteworthy that she tries to form a link with Russia. It becomes significant further on where she writes, Will Strack has made a couple of cut-through videos on TikTok explaining the history and context of the current Voice to Parliament campaign. Sharing these to various online platforms, I made 1,000 exciting new friends overnight, by which I mean I was relentlessly trolled for 2 weeks by no-insisting locked accounts who tended to kick off every night around 3 a.m. I'll spare you the accompanying racism, but the sheer volume of disinformation and misinformation accompanying it has immediate and long-term implications for Australia, none of them good. The author implies that the supporters of the No campaign are not only misinformed, they are just plain mean, nasty, racist people. She has the gall to complain about trolls when she was spamming people with unsolicited Yes campaign propaganda. She insinuates that many of these social media accounts were suspicious. She asks, were they overseas accounts? Perhaps. She's implying that bots, probably Russian bots or possibly Chinese, are the source of much of the misinformation about the Voice. She continues, Yes campaigners inevitably get baited by bad faith provocations, desperately defending the facts, and compulsively citing the easily searchable. Some No campaigners are confusing the hell out of two-time poor for politics, persuadable undecideds, when they smugly suggest that the Voice is somehow risky, so if you don't know, vote no. She portrays Yes supporters as good faith people with facts on their side. The truth is easy to find, you can Google it, but No campaigners are charlatans out to deceive the easily led, vulnerable, gullible masses. In other words, Yes voters are good, No voters are bad. The undecided are ignorant. We've been bombarded with stories about the No rallies. One man shuts down 20 neo-Nazis at No Voice to Parliament rally. Days after neo-Nazis clashed violently with anti-fascists in the Melbourne suburb of Thornbury, they were out again, this time in support of the No campaign against the Voice to Parliament. Members of the far-right National Socialist Network, including leader Thomas Sewell, gathered on the steps of Parliament House on Saturday, holding a sign that read, Voice equals anti-white. The group of around 20 people wore black masks to cover their faces and were heckled by members of the public and on one occasion pepper sprayed by police. This journalist is trying to associate the No campaign with violence. They're a threat. People who support The Voice, however, are portrayed as heroes standing against all odds, people of strong moral fibre. It's also important to note that there were only 20 neo-Nazis. Out of a nation of 25 million, out of all the people who turned up at all the rallies all around the country, only 20 were neo-Nazis. They were a tiny minority. They are a despised minority. Why else would they cover their faces? Because they are afraid of the repercussions if people knew their identity. Because most people hate Nazis. Nazis are not mainstream. They do not hold acceptable views. Most No campaigners would not agree with them. Most of the people at the rallies did not feel the need to cover their faces. They're just normal people expressing a popular view. That's one possible explanation for the masks. That's a surface level explanation if we take everything at face value. There is another more sinister explanation, however. Another possible reason they might need to cover their faces is because they are undercover police or intelligence agents who don't want to be recognised for fear of blowing their cover. The headlines go on. For example, "The astonishing lies of the No campaign burn like lurid rockets in our sky. We must not go saying no," suggesting that the No campaign is built on lies. Of course, The Guardian has to bring up the Tasmanian genocide to guilt people into voting yes. Myth, politics and murder. Why the voice battle in Tasmania is different to everywhere else. From the government's propaganda arm, the ABC. Secret agendas, context-free claims and mistaken identities. These are the key themes in Voice to Parliament misinformation. This so-called fact-check article supposedly debunks many claims of the No campaign while not addressing some of the more substantial arguments. Also from the ABC, Aboriginal heritage laws are distinct from The Voice but have taken centre stage in WA's referendum debate. This is in reference to Western Australia's Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act of 2021, which is a good example of Trojan horse legislation that came in under the radar. It would have given the state government, through the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Council, almost total control over what people could do on their land. It would have affected businesses, farmers and individuals. The Act was repealed not long after it came into effect, and Western Australia has reverted to the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972. I suspect it was repealed because it was harming the Voice campaign, not because Premier Roger Cook cared that it was unpopular. But the 1972 Act is bad enough. Wheatbelt resident Tony Maddox is awaiting trial for building a bridge over a creek on his property. Without it, he wouldn't be able to access his home. But the waterway is home to the Woggle, a mythical serpent. While researching this video, I found out that the Western Australian government is planning to pass an amended Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act. Why do they need to pass a new act? Why not just keep the original Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972? They are probably hoping that the controversy will die down after the referendum so that they can sneak in most of the things they want. I expect it will end up being almost identical to the 2021 Act. The ABC recently released an investigation into how the far right has supposedly infiltrated the anti-Voice campaign. The piece has gained international attention, even being reported in the Courier Herald. You may remember that in a previous video I covered an article in which Chief of the Australian Defence Force General Angus Campbell addressed an Australian Strategic Policy Institute conference. He claimed that Russia had run a disinformation campaign in the lead-up to the Brexit referendum and the 2016 US presidential election. Just as it's important for Australians to believe that Brexit and Trump were the result of foreign interference, so it seems it's important for the rest of the world to believe that the rejection of The Voice will be the result of foreign interference and far-right influence. A global problem requires a global solution. Let's take a look at an interview about the ABC's investigation.
Well, the far right is not particularly popular, especially if you're a neo-Nazi branded with the swastika.
The far right is not particularly popular, especially if you're a neo-Nazi. That is correct. Neo-Nazis are unpopular. They're virtually non-existent. They don't currently pose a threat.
So over the past couple of years, they've had a bit of a rebranding, or at least they're trying to find a broader appeal. Firstly, for radicalisation, and secondly, for recruitment. So to them, the voice of Parliament is an issue they could very much very interested in, because one, to them, in their words, the conversation is racialized. Two, because there seems to be some support for vote no, and all indications that it's very, very close. And the neo-Nazis and white supremacists see it as an opportunity to get into the conversation and to effectively normalize their beliefs. So, there's always been a boogeyman of some sort. So, in the 90s, it was multiculturalism. When that became not palatable, it turned into immigration, then crime. Recently, we saw lockdowns, and then they also were involved in the drag queen storytime events as well. And this is just the latest bandwagon that they're kind of going on to.
Okay, anti-vax groups maybe as well?
The irony of accusing the far right of always using a boogeyman when the ABC and the Guardian always use the far right as a boogeyman. It's interesting that the reporter draws a connection between the No campaign and anti-lockdown, anti-mandate groups. The issues are obviously connected in the minds of the elites and their supporters. It's not just something cooked up by conspiracy theorists. It also goes to show how the establishment has not forgiven COVID dissidents.
We know that white supremacists and far-right supporters produce a lot of material and information to get their word out, to recruit.
We know that white supremacists and far-right supporters produce a lot of material and information to get their word out, to recruit. We all know that apparently. It's an ad populum argument designed to persuade you into going along with the majority, or at least with what the media says the majority believes. He complains that the documentary outperformed anything posted by the Yes23 campaign on Facebook. Perhaps that's because people are tired of the incessant yes propaganda.
What is the impact of the materials that they've produced been?
Yeah, so ABC Investigations, we have revealed today that these far-right groups have infiltrated these kind of freedom, anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine groups promoting today's unofficial anti-voice rallies. The way they did that was they took this old documentary from 1980, even for its time, was rubbish claims. It was incredibly racist. It was created by a former Australian Communist Party member named Jeff McDonald, who was against Asian immigration as well. But he created a documentary which was, at ABC reported at the time in 1983, that it was extremely controversial, that it was the public face at the time of this Indigenous lands rights debate. And what has effectively happened from there was they took that old documentary, reappropriated it, and then injected it, modernized it, and they injected it specifically with very anti-Semitic undertones as well. That video has actually been widely successful. On Facebook alone, it has outperformed anything put out by the Yes23 campaign. And even today, in terms of shares on Facebook, it has outranked almost every official Vote No video as well. That includes from Jacinta Price, from Warren Mundine, and most of Pauline Hanson's posts as well. So it has been hugely effective.
He hits all the buzzwords: racist, anti-immigration, anti-Semitism. I've watched the video and I don't know what he means by they injected it specifically with very anti-Semitic undertones. There are no anti-Semitic comments in the video. Perhaps he means the video was shared by anti-Semitic groups. If we look at the ABC Investigations article, we find that on January 30, the anti-Semitic website XYZ linked McDonald's work to the proposed voice and described it as communism by the back door. I was unable to verify this claim. The XYZ website is now inactive, although it is still available to view. The website does contain anti-Semitic material, but searches for Jeff McDonald or Red Over Black, the title of his book, failed to return any results. I couldn't find any reference to the documentary published on or around the 30th of January. The article continues, 2 days later, a new Telegram channel, Aboriginal Voice Exposed, was created. Its very first post was a link to McDonald's documentary, which it claimed exposes the communist and New World Order agenda behind Aboriginal activism and the so-called Aboriginal voice to Parliament. I was able to verify that the documentary was shared on the AVE Telegram channel on the 1st of February, the same day the channel was created. It in fact seems to have been the XYZ News Telegram channel that shared the documentary originally posted on the AVE channel. In late July, the Red Over Black documentary was adapted to specifically attack The Voice. Key parts were incorporated into a new documentary which promised to expose the secret communist plot behind The Voice. It was posted by a YouTube channel called Blacklisted Research. The new documentary contained racist claims about Jews. Having watched the new Blacklisted Research documentary, I can verify that it does contain racist claims about Jews. However, the new documentary only uses a few minutes from the hour-long Red Over Black documentary. The full original documentary, which contains no anti-Semitic comments, has over 67,000 views on the AVE Telegram channel and is still being widely shared on social media. Watching or sharing a video that was also watched or shared by anti-Semites doesn't make you an anti-Semite. The media is using guilt by association. I wasn't even aware of either documentary until the ABC Investigations article came to my attention, and I'm actively involved in freedom groups. Watching the documentaries hasn't changed my position on The Voice. I agree with McDonald's observation in Red Over Black that the establishment uses the word racism as a cover for their activities and to push people into a position of moral cowardice. It's interesting that the same tactic was being used even back then. However, I don't think everything McDonald says is applicable today in relation to The Voice. The ABC would like to point to the Blacklisted Research documentary and say that that was the one thing that convinced everyone to vote no. The article closes with a comment from far-right and conspiracy theory researcher Dr. Kaz Ross. I find it very distressing to see how the freedom movement has been manipulated and their biases used to create a convincing narrative to vote no. They may not even be aware they've been sharing anti-Semitic content. They don't even know they've been manipulated. Dr. Ross is resorting to proof by assertion. She presented no proof that anyone had been manipulated by anti-Semitic content. She merely stated that people had been. There is an implied question in her statement. Won't someone save the masses from themselves? On the 30th of September, ABC Investigations published another propaganda piece on The Voice. Former Twitter executive Yoel Roth told the ABC, "Elections, and especially elections that touch on divisive social and cultural issues, are prime targets for organised disinformation campaigns and abuse, both foreign and domestic. We've seen this playbook deployed by the governments of Russia, Iran and China, as well as domestic extremist groups around the world. I would expect these threats are present ahead of Australia's referendum this year." Mr. Roth also criticised X for ending its partnerships with civil researchers monitoring online disinformation, including groups like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which he said was an essential part of Twitter's operations in Australia. APSI misinformation and election interference analyst Albert Zhang said his organisation had significantly less engagement with Twitter since Musk's takeover. An ASPI analysis in July found multiple Twitter accounts which appeared to be linked to the Chinese Communist Party were amplifying negative posts related to The Voice to Parliament. We assess this network is very likely linked to the Chinese government and is part of a broader covert campaign to undermine Australia's social cohesion and trust in government through X, Mr. Zhang said. Research published by Queensland University earlier this year also revealed coordinated misinformation on X. Hundreds of accounts which had limited profile information were created in the months following Mr. Musk's takeover and have since begun promoting anti-voice messages. The media is riffing on the theme of foreign interference. Even if China is attempting to influence the referendum result, the ABC has offered no evidence to suggest that anything posted by China's fake X accounts have persuaded anyone to change their mind. They refuse to acknowledge that people have good reason to distrust the government. They refuse to acknowledge the failure of the Yes campaign to articulate a compelling case. But why is it so important to the media to establish that the rejection of The Voice is due to foreign interference? Because if The Voice is rejected due to foreign interference, not only is the government justified in ignoring the referendum result, it is also justified in taking steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. I want to warn you of the clampdown that is coming. The Voice referendum is shaping up to be Australia's Brexit moment, Australia's Trump moment, the moment disinformation and hate prevailed. In the lead up to the Voice referendum, we are seeing similar rhetoric to that which was used in the 2016 US presidential election campaign. Remember Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables speech, in which she referred to Trump supporters as racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic. Remember the subsequent censorship of Facebook and Twitter after Hillary lost. Remember the clampdown on the January 6th protesters after the 2020 election. There is going to be a clampdown on dissent. There are going to be more stringent restrictions on freedom of speech. There will be persecution of political opponents. There will be fallout from this. The referendum is rigged. If the yes vote wins, the government will use the Voice to further the globalist agenda. If the no vote wins, the government will use that as a pretext to expand its powers in the name of fighting foreign interference and disinformation, and it will find some way of implementing an Aboriginal voice to Parliament anyway. Heads I win, tails you lose. The Identify and Disrupt Act of 2021 allows Australian Federal Police and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission to disrupt data by modifying, adding, copying or deleting data in order to frustrate the commission of serious offences online. Police can take over social media accounts and post under the name of the account holder. They can take over websites and post as the administrator. As a result, we have no way of knowing whether sites like XYZ are legitimate. I find it suspicious that the site became inactive in August and that the administrator has apparently withdrawn from political activism. Has blacklisted research been infiltrated by the AFP? Did the AFP make the new documentary, post it and share it on social media, and deploy thousands of bots to like and comment on it? We'll never know. I thought the original 1983 documentary Red Over Black was okay, but it was a bit outdated. Communism is no longer a threat. I have no sympathy for communism, but it is inaccurate to call the current global order communist. While communists were busy infiltrating and co-opting our institutions, they were themselves being infiltrated and co-opted. Most communists and socialists today care nothing for the working man or for equality. They are elitists. Our enemy uses many of the same tactics communists used, but what we are facing today is something different. It has elements of communism and capitalism, but it is different enough from both systems to be called something else. It's a hybrid system. You could call it neo-feudalism, or technocracy if you like. Red Over Black does not address the technocratic takeover. It doesn't mention the World Economic Forum's agenda to end property rights within the next decade. It doesn't mention the climate hoax and how that is being intertwined with land rights issues. Being made 40 years ago, it doesn't even mention the Voice. The Voice proposal in its current form makes no mention of land rights, although I'm sure it will be used to appropriate land. And this is why the ABC wants to draw attention to the documentary. While it's interesting, it doesn't present a case against the Voice. There are much stronger arguments to be made against the Voice than that it's a communist takeover. The ABC has presented a straw man, an argument that is easy to refute. The ABC wants to make it look as if this is the strongest argument the No campaign has, so that it doesn't have to address more relevant, substantive claims. Don't fall for their trap. The Albanese government has an agenda with the Voice. It's not only a vehicle for the continued expansion of global technocracy which began under the COVID regime, it's also a distraction from the human rights abuses committed under the COVID regime. It's no coincidence that the federal COVID inquiry was announced so close to the Voice referendum. It's no coincidence that the media is now warning of the resurgence of COVID and other respiratory diseases. They are hoping you will be distracted with the Voice as they make plans to reintroduce COVID restrictions. To a large extent, the Voice has been a successful distraction. Most people have forgotten about COVID. Even most people in the freedom movement think lockdowns will never come back. But the COVID regime never really ended, and it poses a far greater, more immediate threat to our freedom than the Voice does, and I do think the Voice poses a significant threat. But I don't think people will be locked in their homes and forced to wear a mask and forced to get vaccinated because of the Voice. We know that Labor doesn't care about the rights of Aboriginal people. Remember this story from December 2021, from The Independent. 3 teenagers have been arrested after escaping from a COVID-19 quarantine facility in the middle of the night. Australian police said the 3 boys scaled the fence of the Howard Springs Centre near Darwin in the Northern Territory on Tuesday. Police arrested them after launching a manhunt on Wednesday. All of them had tested negative for COVID the day before. The Northern Territory's Labor government under Chief Minister Michael Gunner was rounding up Aboriginals who didn't have COVID, who weren't sick, and putting them in camps where they were held against their will. If anyone tried to escape, they would be arrested and put back in the camp. The Federal Labor Party didn't speak out against this internment of an ethnic minority, but when anti-lockdown activists spoke out, Western Australia's Labor Premier Mark McGowan labelled them white supremacists and tried to turn the conversation to vaccination. The day after the 3 teens were arrested and returned to quarantine, McGowan made the following statement. There's been some misinformation provided to Aboriginal people from people who do not have their best interests at heart. Just now we heard from one Aboriginal person who said white supremacist groups are sending information to Aboriginal people that they shouldn't get vaccinated. Now the suspicion is these white supremacist groups out of America wouldn't be unhappy if bad outcomes occurred to the health of Aboriginal people in Australia. That's the problem we face. Some of these groups, like white supremacist groups, are doing it because they want to harm Aboriginal people. McGowan was trying to shut down those who were speaking out against the internment of Aboriginals by labelling them white supremacists, by claiming that they wanted Aboriginal people to die. McGowan became complicit in Gunner's policy of arbitrary arrest and detention of Aboriginal people. This is one example that clearly demonstrates the Labor Party's disregard for the rights and humanity of Aboriginal people. We should be very suspicious then when 1 year later Albanese announces the Aboriginal voice to Parliament and then labels anyone who opposes it a white supremacist. Clearly the voice cannot be for the benefit of Aboriginal people, coming from a party with such blatantly nefarious intent. It's obvious that the voice is a Trojan horse. For what though? I can't be certain. You can't see what's hiding in a Trojan horse. That's the whole point. You can only see the wooden horse. The seizure of land does seem like a good candidate, however, but we should be careful about making categorical statements. We won't find out what's in the horse until it's inside the city gates and it opens up, revealing the enemy. We can only try to prevent it from reaching the city. We need to turn back this Greek gift. Don't listen to voice proponents who capitalise on your uncertainty and downplay your suspicions. Even if the government tries to introduce it in another form through the back door, the fight must go on. But be prepared for the aftermath. There will be blowback when the voice fails. They're telling you that they're not going to take no for an answer. They are painting you as a collaborator with a foreign power, as an enemy. There will be retaliation. They really want this. They are threatening you. They are warning you. Heed that warning. But don't be distracted. Don't forget about the COVID years. Don't forget about justice. The COVID regime will return. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and share. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment down below.